music stopped for only a second, but Clara Bennett felt every eye in the ballroom turn toward her at once. "Go on," Margaret Hale whispered, her smile sharp as glass. "Or are you afraid?" Clara's hands were cold inside her gloves. Across the crowded room, near the tall windows, sat the man everyone in the county feared, and no one dared approach. Duke Alaric Sinclair. He sat alone at the head table, a glass of wine untouched before him, his face carved from something colder than marble. Servants moved around him quickly, quietly, as if too much noise might wake something dangerous. "He hasn't spoken a full sentence to anyone in a year," Lucy Farrow added, fanning herself lazily. "Not since what happened with Miss Ashworth. They say he sent a man from his own household away without a single word of warning, simply because the man looked at him wrong." "That is not true," Clara said quietly. "Then prove you are not afraid of a rumor," Margaret said. "Sit beside him, just for dinner. If you can do that, we will never call you a mouse again." Clara looked at the three girls surrounding her, their silk dresses catching the candlelight, their laughter already forming behind their fans. She had heard this laughter before, at every ball, every gathering, every moment she dared to speak above a whisper. Tonight, something inside her refused to shrink. "Fine," she said. "I will sit beside him." The words left her mouth before her fear could stop them, and for a moment, the three girls looked almost disappointed that she had agreed so quickly. Clara walked across the ballroom floor, feeling the weight of dozens of stares pressing against her back. The orchestra had resumed playing, but the music seemed distant now, as if it belonged to a different world than the one she was stepping into. She kept her chin high, the way her mother had taught her before she passed, though her heart pounded so hard she feared the Duke himself might hear it. The empty chair beside him seemed to grow larger with every step she took toward it. When she finally reached the table, she saw him more clearly than she had from across the room. His dark hair was neatly combed, though a single strand had fallen loose over his forehead. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on some invisible point across the room, as though he were somewhere else entirely, somewhere far from this ballroom filled with people who whispered about him behind painted fans. "Excuse me," Clara said softly. "Is this seat taken?" For the first time, the Duke turned his head. His eyes, a deep and unreadable gray, studied her for a long moment before he answered. "No," he said, "it is not." His voice was low, controlled, without warmth, but without the cruelty she had expected either. Clara sat down carefully, smoothing her skirts, trying to appear calmer than she felt. She could sense the entire room watching them now, could hear the faint hum of conversation pause, and then resume in hushed, excited tones. A servant placed a plate before her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara stared at her food, unsure whether she should attempt conversation or simply endure the silence until the meal ended. She had expected him to ignore her completely, the way he seemed to ignore everyone else in the room. Instead, she felt his gaze return to her, steady and searching. "You do not look afraid," he said finally. Clara's fork paused halfway to her plate. "Should I be? Everyone else is. Perhaps everyone else has heard more stories than I have." Something flickered across his face, so brief she almost missed it. It was not quite a smile, but it was not the coldness she had expected either. "And you do not believe the stories?" "I did not say that," Clara replied honestly. "I only said I have not heard enough of them to be afraid yet." But the Duke set down his own fork and turned his full attention toward her, as if she had said something far more interesting than she realized. Across the room, Clara caught sight of Margaret and Lucy watching with wide, disbelieving eyes, their earlier amusement replaced by something closer to shock. "Most people," the Duke said slowly, "find a way to avoid speaking to me at all. I was dared to sit here," Clara admitted. She saw no reason to hide it. Pretending otherwise felt like a lie she did not wish to tell, especially not to a man everyone claimed could see through pretense in an instant. To her surprise, he did not seem offended. If anything, something in his expression eased slightly, as though her honesty had surprised him more than any flattery could have. "At least you are truthful," he said. "That is rarer than courage in rooms like this one." Clara felt her cheeks warm, though she was not entirely sure why. She had expected anger, or silence, or the kind of cold dismissal the rumors promised. Instead, She found herself sitting beside a man who watched her, as though she were the only person in the room worth watching at all. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara Bennett." "Miss Bennett," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "I am Alaric Sinclair. I know who you are, Your Grace." "Everyone knows who I am," he said, and for the first time, there was something almost tired in his voice, something that made Clara wonder, just briefly, what it might be like to carry a reputation so heavy that strangers feared you before you had even spoken a word. The dinner continued, course after course, and slowly, hesitantly, conversation began to flow between them. He asked her strange questions, questions no one else at these gatherings ever bothered to ask. What she thought of the books piled on the shelves of her father's small study, whether she believed people could truly change, or whether some wounds simply stayed. Whether she found the city more lonely than the countryside, or the other way around. Clara answered as honestly as she could, surprised at how easily the words came once she stopped worrying about impressing him. She had spent so many years learning how to shrink herself smaller at these gatherings, how to speak softly and agree quickly, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply say what she believed. "You disagree with most people in this room," the Duke observed at one point, after she had spoken plainly about a matter of local politics that the other guests had only murmured about in vague, careful terms. "I disagree with most people in general," Clara said. "It has never made me popular." "No," he agreed. "I imagine it has not." But he did not say it unkindly. If anything, there was something almost like respect in the way he studied her afterward, as though he were re-evaluating an assumption he had made the moment she sat down. As the meal drew to its end, Clara noticed the whispers around the ballroom had grown louder, no longer bothering to hide themselves behind polite fans. Guests leaned toward one another, eyes darting between her and the Duke, voices dropping into scandalized murmurs. She had never been the subject of so much attention in her life, and part of her wanted nothing more than to disappear beneath the table. But another part of her, a part she barely recognized, felt something close to satisfaction. When the final course was cleared away, and guests began rising to dance, the Duke turned to her one last time. "Thank you for the conversation, Miss Bennett," he said. "It has been some time since anyone spoke to me as though I were simply a man, rather than a rumor." Clara did not know how to respond to that, so she said the only true thing she could think of. "Perhaps it is easier to speak plainly to someone people already expect me to fear." Something in his gray eyes shifted then, something unreadable and deep, and for a moment, Clara thought she saw the faintest trace of a real smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "you are the only one brave enough to see past it." As she rose from her seat and walked back toward Margaret and Lucy, who stared at her, with expressions she had never seen on their faces before, Clara felt the weight of dozens of eyes still following her. But for the first time all evening, she did not feel small beneath them. She felt, strangely, seen. And across the room, though she did not turn to check, she could feel the Duke's eyes following her still, long after she had left his side. The whispers had not stopped by morning. If anything, they had grown louder, spreading from the ballroom into every parlor and breakfast table across the county, before the sun had fully risen. Clara learned this the moment her younger sister Alice burst into her room, still in her nightgown, clutching a folded note that had arrived by messenger less than an hour earlier. "Everyone is talking about you," Alice said, breathless with excitement. Mrs. Whitmore heard it from the baker's wife, who heard it from someone at the ball. "They say the Duke spoke to you for the entire dinner. They say he smiled." "He did not smile," Clara said, though even as she spoke the words, she remembered the flicker at the corner of his mouth, and felt her stomach tighten strangely. "That is not what people are saying." Alice sat on the edge of the bed, eyes wide. "They say you are the first person in a year he has spoken to for longer than a greeting. Clara, do you understand what this means? People who would not look at you twice yesterday are asking after you today." Clara did not particularly want to be discussed by people who would not look at her twice yesterday. She had agreed to the dare to silence the mockery, not to invite an entirely new kind of attention, one that felt far heavier and far more uncertain than being ignored ever had. She dressed slowly that morning, turning the memory of the previous night over in her mind. She thought of the Duke's steady gray eyes, the low and careful way he spoke, as though every word had been considered twice before he allowed it past his lips. She thought of the strange, unexpected questions he had asked her, questions that had nothing to do with dresses or dances or the usual empty conversations that filled ballrooms. She wondered, briefly, what kind of man asked a near stranger whether she believed people could change. By midday, a second surprise arrived. A servant in fine livery appeared at the Bennet household, holding a small parcel wrapped carefully in paper. "For Miss Bennet," the servant said, bowing slightly. "From His Grace, the Duke of Renfield." Clara's father, Mr. Henry Bennet, looked up from his ledgers, with an expression somewhere between confusion and alarm. "The Duke sent something? Here?" Clara took the parcel with hands that trembled slightly more than she wished to admit. Inside, wrapped with careful precision, was her fan, the very one she had dropped beneath the table during dinner, without even realizing it was missing. A short note accompanied it, written in a firm, elegant hand. "You left this behind, Miss Bennet. I thought it best returned, rather than left to become the subject of further gossip, though I suspect that ship has already sailed. A. Sinclair." Clara read the note twice, searching for some hidden meaning behind the simple words, though she found none beyond what was plainly written. Still, something about the gesture unsettled her, in a way she could not name. A man with a household of servants, a man rumored to barely speak to anyone at all, had taken the time to have her fan returned personally, along with a note that almost sounded like humor. "What does it say?" her father asked. "Nothing important," Clara said, folding the note quickly. "Only that I left my fan behind." Her father did not look entirely convinced, but he returned to his ledgers without further question, the way he always did when a matter seemed beyond his understanding. That afternoon, Clara walked to the market with Alice, hoping the familiar routine of errands might settle the strange unease that had followed her since morning. But even there, she could not escape the attention. Women she barely knew nodded at her with new interest. A group of young men tipped their hats as she passed, murmuring to one another the moment she was out of earshot, though not quite far enough to miss the word Duke carried on the wind. "You are famous," Alice said cheerfully, looping her arm through Clara's. "I do not want to be famous," Clara said. "I want to be left alone." "That seems unlikely now." Clara sighed, knowing her sister was right. She had spent years being overlooked, and now, after a single dinner, she had become the center of attention, for reasons she barely understood herself. It should have felt like a victory, proof that Margaret and Lucy's mockery had failed to diminish her. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something far larger than she had intended to step into. As they passed the edge of the square, Clara noticed a carriage stop near the old bookshop, its dark wood polished to a shine, a crest she now recognized, painted delicately on its door. Her breath caught before she even saw him step down from it. The Duke moved with the same careful, measured control she had noticed the night before, though here, away from the ballroom and its watching eyes, he seemed somehow less guarded. He noticed her almost immediately, his gaze finding hers across the square, with an ease that suggested he had not been entirely surprised to see her there. "Miss Bennet," he said, approaching with a slight incline of his head, "I did not expect to encounter you again so soon." "Your Grace," Clara replied, dropping into a small curtsy, aware of Alice beside her, practically vibrating with excitement at the encounter. "Thank you for returning my fan. It seemed the least I could do, given the circumstances of last night." Something almost like amusement colored his tone. "Though I understand the entire county now believes we are engaged in some manner of secret romance." Clara felt her face flush warm, despite the cool afternoon air. "I have heard similar rumors, yes. Rumors have never troubled me before," the Duke said. "I did not expect this one to bother me either, until I realized it might trouble you. I can bear a little gossip, Your Grace." "Can you?" His gray eyes studied her carefully, as though searching for something beneath her calm exterior. "Most people cannot, not when it involves my name. I have seen reputations crumble under far less scrutiny than what you are likely to face now." "Then perhaps," Clara said, surprising herself with her own boldness, "we shall have to prove them wrong together." For a long moment, the Duke said nothing, though something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked almost like genuine surprise. Alice, standing quietly beside her sister, glanced between them with barely contained delight. "You are an unusual woman, Miss Bennet," the Duke said finally. "I have been told that before, Your Grace, rarely as a compliment. I meant it as one. Before Clara could respond, a light rain began to fall, scattering the market crowd toward shelter. The Duke glanced upward briefly, then back toward her, something unreadable crossing his expression. "I should not keep you standing in the rain," he said. "But I find myself hoping our paths cross again soon, Miss Bennet." "As do I, Your Grace," Clara admitted, and she meant it, despite every warning instinct urging her toward caution. He inclined his head once more, before returning to his carriage, and Clara stood watching as it pulled away, rain gathering softly on her shoulders, her heart beating with a strange and unfamiliar rhythm she could not quite name. "He likes you," Alice whispered beside her, grinning, despite the rain soaking through her bonnet. "I have never seen anyone speak to him the way you do." "He is simply curious," Clara said, though even as she spoke the words, she did not entirely believe them herself. That evening, as she sat by the window in her room, watching raindrops trace slow paths down the glass, Clara found herself thinking not of the mockery that had started everything, nor of the whispers that now followed her through every street and market stall, but of the way the Duke's expression had softened, just slightly, when he admitted he hoped to see her again. She did not yet understand what it meant, this strange and sudden shift in a man everyone believed incapable of warmth, but she understood, with a certainty that both thrilled and unsettled her, that whatever had begun between them at that dinner table was far from finished. And somewhere across the county, in a grand house with too many empty rooms, Duke Alaric Sinclair stood by his own window, staring out at the same falling rain, wondering why a single dinner with an honest, unafraid young woman had unsettled the careful stillness he had spent years building around his heart. A week passed before the invitation arrived, delivered by the same servant in fine livery, though this time the parcel was larger, containing a formal card bearing the Duke's crest, along with a short, carefully worded note. "You mentioned an interest in books during our conversation. My library holds several volumes you may find of value. You are welcome to visit, accompanied by whomever you deem appropriate, this coming afternoon. A. Sinclair." Clara stared at the card for a long moment, turning it over in her hands, as though the answer to her uncertainty might be written on the back. An invitation to visit a duke's private estate was no small matter, and she understood, even before her father voiced his concern that evening, that accepting would only fuel the rumors already circulating through the county. "You do not have to go," her father said gently, setting down his pipe. "No one would think less of you for declining." "I know," Clara said, "but I want to go." Her father studied her for a long moment, something thoughtful in his expression. "Then you shall go, and Alice will accompany you, as is proper." Alice, upon hearing this, could barely contain her excitement, though Clara suspected her sister's enthusiasm had far more to do with seeing the inside of a duke's estate than any concern for propriety. The following afternoon, their carriage rolled through iron gates and along a long gravel drive lined with ancient oak trees, until the estate itself came into view, an imposing structure of gray stone that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. Clara felt her earlier confidence falter slightly as she stepped down from the carriage, staring up at windows that seemed to watch her approach. The Duke himself met them at the entrance, dressed more simply than she had seen him at the ball, his dark coat unbuttoned, his expression noticeably lighter than the careful control he had worn that first evening. "Miss Bennet," he said, offering a small bow. "Miss Alice Bennet. Welcome to Renfield." He led them through wide corridors lined with portraits of solemn ancestors, past rooms filled with furniture too fine to touch, until they reached a vast library, shelves rising from floor to ceiling, filled with more books than Clara had ever seen gathered in a single place. Alice, true to her nature, wandered off almost immediately toward a nearby shelf, leaving Clara standing beside the Duke amid the quiet hush of countless pages. "This is remarkable," Clara said, turning slowly to take in the towering shelves. "My mother built most of this collection," the Duke said. "She believed a person should never run out of new worlds to explore, even if they could not leave their own." Something in his voice, quiet and distant, caught Clara's attention. Was she unwell? For many years, yes. He moved toward a nearby shelf, running his fingers lightly along the spines of several worn books. "She passed when I was young. My father followed not long after, leaving me this house, this title, and very little guidance on how to carry either." Clara said nothing, sensing there was more beneath his measured words, though she did not wish to press him further than he was willing to go. They walked slowly between the shelves, and gradually, without her quite noticing how it happened, the conversation shifted from books to something deeper. "You asked me once whether people could change," the Duke said eventually, his gaze fixed on a distant window rather than on her. "I have wondered the same thing myself, more often than I would like to admit. What changed you, Your Grace?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Clara wondered if she had overstepped some invisible boundary. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its usual careful control. "I was engaged once," he said, "to a woman named Vivian Ashworth. I believed for a time that I understood her completely. I was wrong." Clara waited, sensing the difficulty behind each word, though she did not interrupt. "She was not who I believed her to be," he continued. "The details do not matter now, only that the betrayal was significant enough that I found it difficult to trust anyone afterward, particularly anyone who seemed eager for my attention or my title. It became easier, over time, to simply withdraw from society altogether, to let the rumors grow into whatever shape they wished, rather than correct them." "That sounds lonely," Clara said quietly. "It was," he admitted. "It is, still, more often than I would like to confess." He turned toward her then, his gray eyes searching hers, with an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. "You are the first person in a long while who has not seemed interested in my title at all, only in the man beneath it. Perhaps," Clara said carefully, "that is because I never expected to speak with you in the first place. There was no strategy behind our first conversation, Your Grace. Only a dare I refused to lose." A genuine smile crossed his face then, brief but real, transforming his features into something far less severe than the cold mask he wore in public. "Then I suppose I owe your tormentors a strange debt of gratitude." Clara laughed softly, surprising herself with how easily it came. "I would not go quite that far." They continued through the library for another hour, discussing books, ideas, small fragments of their separate lives, until Alice reappeared with an armful of borrowed volumes and a knowing grin that suggested she had noticed far more than either of them realized. As their carriage finally pulled away from the estate, Clara found herself glancing back toward the tall windows, wondering if the Duke still stood somewhere behind them, watching her leave the way she suspected he had watched her arrive. "You like him," Alice said, once the estate had disappeared from view. "I barely know him," Clara replied, though even she could hear how unconvincing the words sounded. "That has never stopped anyone from liking someone before." Clara did not answer, choosing instead to look out the carriage window at the passing countryside, her mind still lingering on the quiet vulnerability she had glimpsed behind the Duke's careful composure. She understood now, more clearly than before, that the fearsome reputation surrounding him was built not from cruelty, but from grief, and from a betrayal that had taught him to guard himself against exactly the kind of connection now slowly forming between them. She did not yet know how deep that old wound truly ran, nor how much danger still lingered in its shadow, but she understood, with a certainty that settled somewhere deep in her chest, that she wanted to know more, regardless of what it might cost her. "Vivian Ashworth," Lady Constance said, setting down her teacup with deliberate precision. "You did not think to ask what truly happened between her and my nephew before you accepted his invitation to that library of his." Clara had not expected to encounter the Duke's aunt so soon, nor had she expected the older woman to arrive at the Bennet household uninvited, wrapped in furs despite the mild afternoon, her sharp eyes assessing every corner of the modest sitting room as though cataloging its shortcomings. "I was not aware there was more to ask, my lady," Clara said carefully. "Of course you were not. No one tells the whole story anymore. They prefer the simple version, the one where Alaric is merely a wounded man nursing a broken heart." Lady Constance's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "The truth is considerably less flattering to everyone involved, including, I dare say, my nephew himself. Then perhaps you should tell me the truth, my lady, rather than imply it." Lady Constance studied her for a long moment, seemingly surprised by the directness of the response. Vivian Ashworth was engaged to marry Alaric for nearly a year. During that time, she formed an attachment to his younger brother, Edwin, one she hid quite skillfully, until the truth became impossible to ignore. The scandal very nearly destroyed this family's standing. Alaric withdrew from society almost entirely afterward, and I do not believe he has trusted anyone easily since, myself included. Clara absorbed this information quietly, thinking of the guarded sadness she had glimpsed in the Duke's expression when he first mentioned Vivian's name. That must have been painful for him. It was more than painful, Miss Bennet. It was humiliating, in front of the entire county. And I have watched my nephew rebuild himself, piece by careful piece, into a man who trusts almost no one. I have no intention of watching that progress unravel, because a young woman with no fortune and no particular standing has managed to charm him during a single dinner. The words stung more than Clara wished to admit, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. I did not seek his attention, my lady. I was dared to sit beside him, nothing more. And yet here we are, weeks later, with him sending carriages and library invitations, as though you were already courting. Lady Constance rose from her seat, smoothing her skirts with brisk, efficient movements. I am not asking you to abandon whatever has begun between you, Miss Bennet. I am simply warning you that if your intentions are anything less than sincere, the consequences will fall far more heavily on him than on you. He has been hurt enough for one lifetime. After Lady Constance departed, Clara sat alone in the quiet parlor for a long while, turning the conversation over in her mind. She understood, with uncomfortable clarity, that the warning had not been entirely unkind, even if it had been delivered with sharp edges. Lady Constance clearly loved her nephew, in her own guarded way, and feared watching him suffer another betrayal. That evening, as Clara helped her father review the household accounts by candlelight, she found herself distracted, her thoughts circling back again and again to the story of Vivian Ashworth and the brother who had betrayed his own family for her affection. She wondered how such a betrayal must have felt, not only to lose the woman he had planned to marry, but to lose her to someone who should have protected his trust rather than destroyed it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. To her surprise, it was the Duke himself, arriving without prior notice, his expression troubled in a way she had not seen before. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, once she had shown him into the small sitting room. "My aunt informed me she paid you a visit today. I feared what she may have said." "She told me about Vivian," Clara said honestly, "and about your brother." Something tightened in the Duke's jaw, though he did not look away. "I see. I am sorry," Clara said softly. "That sounds like a wound that never fully closed." "It has not," he admitted. "Edwin left the country shortly after the scandal broke. I have not spoken to him since. Vivian married elsewhere within the year, as though nothing had happened at all, while I remained here, rebuilding a reputation that had crumbled through no true fault of my own, except perhaps for trusting too easily." "You are not required to explain any of this to me, Your Grace." "I know," he said, "but I find myself wanting to, regardless." He sat across from her, his gray eyes steady, despite the vulnerability in his voice. "My aunt fears you will hurt me the way Vivian did. I understand her fear, even if I do not share it." "Do you not?" Clara asked quietly. "I have considered it," he admitted. "It would be foolish not to, given everything I have endured. But you have given me no reason to doubt you, Miss Bennet, and I find that I trust my own judgment on this matter more than my aunt's fear, however well-intentioned it may be." Clara felt something warm settle in her chest at his words, though she also felt the weight of responsibility they carried. Trust, once broken so severely, was not easily rebuilt, and she understood now, more fully than before, exactly how much courage it must have taken him to extend it toward her at all. "Then I will try to be worthy of that trust," she said simply. The Duke studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before a small, genuine smile finally broke through his careful composure. "I believe you will be, Miss Bennet. I believe you already are." Neither of them spoke of Lady Constance's warning again that evening, though it lingered quietly between them, a reminder that whatever was growing between them carried real risk, not only to Clara's reputation, but to a heart that had already been broken once before, and had only just begun, cautiously, to consider opening again. As the Duke's carriage disappeared into the darkening evening, Clara stood at her window for a long while, watching the empty road, aware that the warmth she felt was tangled tightly together, with a growing fear of exactly how much there now was to lose. "She is nothing but a scheming little mouse," Margaret Hale hissed, pacing across Lucy Farrow's drawing room with a fury she made no effort to hide. "We handed her the opportunity ourselves, and now she struts about the county, as though she has captured a prize none of us could ever hope to win. You did not expect the Duke to actually notice her, Lucy said, arranging herself carefully on the settee. None of us did. It was meant to be a joke, not an invitation. Then we shall have to remind everyone of that fact, Margaret said, a cold smile spreading across her face. A joke can still ruin a reputation, Lucy, especially one as fragile as Clara Bennett's. Charlotte Gray, seated quietly by the window, glanced up with visible unease. What exactly do you intend to do? Only what is true, Margaret said innocently. That she came from nothing, that her father's finances are hardly secure, that she likely sees the Duke as nothing more than a convenient escape from a life of quiet poverty. People will believe it easily enough, given how quickly her fortunes seem to have changed. Within days, the whispers Clara had grown accustomed to shifted into something sharper, something with teeth. She noticed it first at church, where conversations paused a beat too long as she passed, then again at the market, where a shopkeeper's wife regarded her with a coolness that had not existed the week before. They are saying you are only interested in his title, Alice reported one evening, her earlier excitement replaced by clear concern, that you have no genuine feeling for him at all, only ambition. That is not true, Clara said, though she felt a flicker of fear at how easily such rumors seemed to spread, how quickly people who barely knew her seemed eager to believe the worst. I know that, Alice said, but not everyone does. The rumors reached the Duke's household as well, delivered in the careful, concerned tone of Lady Constance during another unexpected visit, though this time her expression carried less warning and more genuine worry. They are calling you a fortune seeker, Miss Bennet, she said bluntly, settling into the same chair she had occupied during her previous visit. I confess, I did not entirely believe it myself, but rumors of this nature tend to grow teeth of their own, regardless of their truth. I have no interest in his title, my lady, Clara said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath it. I never sought his attention in the first place. I know that, Lady Constance said, somewhat to Clara's surprise. I have watched you closely these past weeks, Miss Bennet, and I do not believe you to be the woman these rumors describe. But belief and reputation are different currencies entirely, and I fear my nephew's enemies will use whatever weapon proves most convenient, regardless of its accuracy. Enemies? Clara repeated. A man of his standing collects them without effort, Lady Constance said dryly. Some envy his title, others resent his wealth. A few, I suspect, simply enjoy watching a proud man stumble. Margaret Hale's family has long sought closer ties to the Sinclair name, through marriage or otherwise. I would not be entirely surprised if she found herself motivated to see this particular attachment fail. Clara absorbed this information with a growing sense of unease. She had assumed the rumors sprang purely from jealousy, a petty response to being outmatched in a dare gone unexpectedly wrong. She had not considered that deeper ambitions might lie beneath the cruelty, ambitions that made the stakes of this entire situation far higher than she had first realized. That evening, as Clara walked alone through the small garden behind her family's home, trying to steady her thoughts, she found the Duke waiting near the gate, his expression tense in a way she had not seen since their very first conversation. You have heard the rumors, she said, before he could speak. I have, he confirmed, and I confess, for a moment, they troubled me more than I would like to admit. Clara's stomach tightened. Do you believe them? No, he said firmly, closing the distance between them. I do not believe them for a single moment, but I have been deceived before, Miss Bennet, by someone I trusted completely, and I would be lying if I claimed the fear of repeating that mistake does not linger somewhere within me. Then what convinced you otherwise? You, he said simply. Every conversation we have shared has told me more about your character than any rumor ever could. A woman seeking only my title would not have spoken so plainly to me that first evening, nor would she have questioned me the way you have, nor challenged my assumptions the way you continue to do even now. Clara felt something loosen in her chest at his words, though the fear of the spreading gossip remained. Others will not be so easily convinced. Perhaps not, the Duke admitted, but I find I care considerably less about the opinions of people determined to believe the worst, and considerably more about protecting the truth of what exists between us, whatever that may eventually become. And what does exist between us, Your Grace? Clara asked quietly, the question slipping free before she could stop it. The Duke was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching hers, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I am not entirely certain yet," he admitted. "But I know. I think of you far more often than is wise for a man determined to guard his heart. I know your honesty has become something I look forward to more than I anticipated, and I know I have no intention of allowing petty rumors, however sharp their teeth, to end something before it has truly begun." Clara felt tears prick unexpectedly at her eyes, though whether from relief or something deeper, she could not entirely say. "Thank you," she said softly, "for trusting me, despite everything." "Thank you," he replied, "for giving me a reason to." They stood together in the quiet garden a while longer, the growing darkness wrapping around them like a shield against the sharper world beyond its borders. But even as comfort settled between them, Clara understood that Margaret Hale, and whatever ambitions lay behind her cruelty, would not simply disappear, because the Duke had chosen, for now, to trust her. The battle for his heart, it seemed, had only just begun in earnest, and Clara feared the sharpest attacks were still yet to come. The county assembly hall had never felt so crowded, nor so tense, as it did the evening Margaret Hale finally decided to speak her rumors aloud, rather than merely whispering them behind painted fans. Clara had not wanted to attend, sensing correctly that trouble waited somewhere within the gathering, but her father had insisted, unwilling to let gossip dictate whether his daughter could attend a public event she had every right to enjoy. She stood near the refreshment table with Alice, trying to ignore the curious glances directed her way, when Margaret's voice rose deliberately loud enough to carry across the room. "I only wonder," Margaret said to a small cluster of listeners, though her eyes flicked pointedly toward Clara, "how a family with debts as significant as the Bennets happened to catch the eye of the wealthiest duke in the county, quite so conveniently." A ripple of murmurs spread through the nearby guests. Clara felt her face burn, though she forced herself to remain still, refusing to give Margaret the satisfaction of a visible reaction. "Perhaps," Margaret continued, raising her voice further, "some ambitions require little more than a well-timed dare and a talent for appearing humble. That is enough, Margaret." The voice cut through the murmuring crowd with quiet, absolute authority, and every head in the room turned toward its source. Duke Alaric Sinclair stood near the entrance, having arrived without the usual fanfare that typically announced his presence, his expression colder and more commanding than Clara had ever witnessed. Margaret's confident smile faltered instantly. "Your Grace, I only meant—" "I know precisely what you meant," the Duke said, crossing the room with slow, deliberate steps that seemed to draw every eye along with him. "You meant to wound a woman whose only crime was refusing to shrink herself for your amusement. You meant to punish her for a dare that succeeded far better than you anticipated." The room had gone utterly silent now, guests frozen mid-conversation, glasses paused halfway to lips, as the Duke continued speaking with a controlled fury that seemed all the more powerful for its restraint. "Miss Bennet's family finances are none of your concern, nor mine, nor anyone else's gathered in this room tonight," he continued. "And should you or anyone else feel compelled to question her character further, you may direct those questions to me directly, since I find myself considerably more invested in defending her reputation than my own." Margaret's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence entirely dissolved beneath the weight of the Duke's public rebuke. "I meant no true harm, Your Grace." "Then perhaps," he said coolly, "you might consider the harm your words nearly caused before choosing to speak them so carelessly in the future." He turned then, leaving Margaret standing alone amid the stunned silence of the assembly hall, and crossed the remaining distance toward Clara, with the same measured, unhurried steps. "Miss Bennet," he said, offering a small bow, as though the entire confrontation had not just occurred, "might I request the honor of this dance?" Clara stared at him for a long moment, still absorbing the shock of what had just unfolded, before she finally found her voice. "You did not need to defend me so publicly, Your Grace." "I disagree," he said simply. "I have spent a year allowing rumors to define me without correction, and I have watched the damage that silence causes. I have no intention of allowing the same silence to harm you." He extended his hand, and after only the briefest hesitation, Clara took it, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor, as the orchestra, sensing the moment, began a slow and gentle waltz. Around them, the assembly hall slowly returned to hushed conversation, though every word now carried a different tone entirely, one of astonishment rather than mockery. "You have made quite a statement tonight, Your Grace," Clara said softly, as they moved together across the floor. "I have made an overdue one," he corrected. "I should have spoken sooner, before the rumors grew sharp enough to wound you. Lady Constance warned me that defending me publicly might damage your own standing further." "My standing has survived worse than a single evening's gossip," the Duke said. "What it has not survived, quite so easily, is watching someone I have come to care for be attacked without cause, while I remain silent, out of some misguided concern for my own reputation." Clara's breath caught at his words. "You care for me?" He met her eyes steadily, his usual careful composure softened by something warmer, something she had only glimpsed in fragments until this moment. "More than I expected to, and more than I know how to properly express, given how carefully I have guarded myself these past years." "I care for you as well," Clara admitted, the words leaving her before caution could stop them. "Far more than I expected, when I first sat beside you out of nothing more than stubborn pride." A genuine smile broke across the Duke's face then, transforming his features entirely, and for a moment, the entire assembly hall seemed to fade away around them, leaving only the quiet, growing certainty settling between two people who had begun as strangers and were quickly becoming something far more significant to one another. Across the room, Margaret Hale watched the exchange with an expression of bitter defeat, while Lady Constance, observing from a nearby corner, allowed herself the smallest, most reluctant smile of approval. But even as the dance continued, and the warmth between them grew steadier with each passing moment, Clara could not shake a quiet unease settling somewhere beneath her happiness. Margaret's humiliation tonight would not go unanswered, she suspected, and a woman capable of spreading rumors so easily would not simply retreat after a single public defeat. Somewhere beyond the warmth of the assembly hall, she feared, a sharper storm was already gathering. The letter arrived on a gray morning, and Clara knew from the moment her father's hands began to shake that its contents carried more weight than the ordinary business correspondence he usually received. "Father, what is wrong?" Clara asked, watching him lower himself slowly into his chair, the letter still clutched in his fingers. "The harvest loan," he said quietly. "The bank has called it due within the month. I had believed we had more time to arrange repayment, but it seems circumstances have changed." Clara took the letter, reading the formal, unyielding language herself, her stomach sinking with each line. Her father had never spoken openly of the family's financial difficulties, preferring to shield his daughters from worry, but the truth had clearly grown too large to hide any longer. "How much do we owe?" she asked. "More than we can gather in a month," he admitted, his voice heavy with a shame he had clearly carried alone for some time. "I had hoped a good harvest this season might ease the burden, but the weather has not cooperated, and I fear we may lose the house itself if a solution cannot be found." That same afternoon, as though summoned by the family's misfortune, Lord Percy Hollis arrived at the Bennet household, his carriage considerably grander than the modest circumstances of the home he approached. Clara had encountered him only briefly at previous gatherings, a wealthy landowner from a neighboring county, known more for his fortune than his charm, though she had never given him particular thought until this moment. "Mr. Bennet," Lord Percy said smoothly, once seated in the small parlor, "I understand your family faces certain financial difficulties. I wish to offer my assistance, given the circumstances." "That is generous of you, my lord," Clara's father said, clearly startled by the unexpected visit, "though I confess, I do not entirely understand the reason behind such generosity." Lord Percy's gaze shifted deliberately toward Clara, and in that instant, she understood exactly what price his assistance would demand. "I have long admired your daughter, Mr. Bennet. I would be willing to settle your debts entirely, in exchange for her hand in marriage." The room fell silent. Clara felt her heart pound, with a mixture of anger and fear, understanding immediately the impossible position this proposal created. Refuse, and her family risked losing everything they owned. Accept, and she would sacrifice any future she might build with the Duke, along with any hope of choosing her own path forward. "I cannot answer such a proposal on my daughter's behalf," her father said carefully, though Clara could hear the strain in his voice, the quiet desperation of a man watching his family's security, balanced against his daughter's happiness. "Of course," Lord Percy said, rising smoothly. I shall allow you both time to consider, though I would remind you, the bank's deadline does not offer similar patience." After he departed, Clara sat in silence for a long while, her thoughts racing between loyalty to her family and the deepening feelings she had allowed herself to embrace with the Duke. She had not told her father about Lord Percy's true intentions immediately, unable to bring herself to speak the impossible choice aloud. That evening, unable to bear the weight of her thoughts alone, Clara walked to Renfield, arriving unannounced, her composure barely holding as the Duke greeted her at the entrance with visible concern. "Clara, what has happened?" he asked, guiding her quickly into the warmth of his study. She told him everything: the letter, the impossible debt, Lord Percy's proposal, and the price it demanded. The Duke listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail, until finally, when she finished, he took her hands gently in his own. "You will not marry Lord Percy Hollis," he said firmly. "My family will lose everything if I refuse him," Clara said, tears finally slipping free despite her efforts to remain composed. "I cannot ask you to solve a problem that is not yours to carry." "You are not asking," the Duke said. "I am choosing, freely, to help. I have the means to settle your father's debt entirely, without condition, without expectation of anything in return beyond your continued honesty with me. I cannot accept such generosity, without feeling as though I have simply traded one obligation for another," Clara said, her pride warring against her fear. "Then consider it not a trade, but a gift, offered because I care for you and your family, and because I have no intention of watching a man like Percy Hollis exploit your circumstances for his own gain." His gray eyes held hers steadily, filled with a quiet determination she had not seen from him before. "Let me help you, Clara. Not because you owe me anything, but because I want to." Clara studied his face for a long moment, searching for any trace of obligation or expectation hidden behind his offer, and finding none, only genuine concern and something that looked remarkably like love, though neither of them had yet spoken that word aloud. "Thank you," she whispered finally, allowing herself, for the first time since the letter arrived, to feel a small measure of relief. But even as the Duke arranged, within days, to quietly settle her father's debt through his own solicitors, Clara understood that Lord Percy Hollis would not simply accept his rejected proposal without consequence. Men accustomed to acquiring whatever they desired rarely surrendered gracefully, and she feared, with good reason, that his wounded pride might prove every bit as dangerous as Margaret Hale's earlier cruelty had been. The storm gathering around her happiness, it seemed, had only grown larger, drawing in more players than she had first anticipated, each with their own reasons for wishing to see her carefully rebuilt world collapse entirely. Lord Percy Hollis did not accept his rejection quietly. Within a fortnight, new rumors began circulating through the county, though these carried a different tone entirely from Margaret Hale's earlier accusations. These whispers suggested something darker, something that struck directly at the trust the Duke had so carefully extended toward Clara. "They are saying you accepted his help only because Lord Percy offered marriage first," Alice reported one evening, her expression troubled. "That you used his proposal to pressure the Duke into paying father's debts, as though you had planned the entire situation deliberately." Clara felt cold dread settle in her stomach. "That is not what happened." "I know that," Alice said quickly. "But Lord Percy has been telling anyone who will listen that you strung him along for weeks, encouraging his attention, before abandoning him the moment a wealthier prospect presented himself." The lie was clever, Clara realized, precisely because it twisted a fragment of truth into something poisonous. She had never encouraged Lord Percy's attention, but the timing of events, her father's debt, the sudden proposal, the Duke's swift intervention, could easily be reshaped into a narrative of calculated ambition for anyone inclined to believe the worst. Worse still, Lady Constance arrived the following morning, her expression far more severe than during her previous visits. "My nephew has heard the rumors," she said without preamble, seating herself stiffly in the parlor. "I do not believe them myself, Miss Bennet, but I confess, even I felt a moment's doubt upon hearing how neatly the timing aligned. A debt appears, a wealthy suitor proposes, and within days, my nephew has settled the matter entirely through his own funds. It paints a convenient picture, whether or not it reflects the truth." "I never asked him to intervene in such a manner," Clara said, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the fear building within her. He offered freely, out of his own concern for my family. "I believe you," Lady Constance said, somewhat to Clara's surprise. But belief is not always enough to undo suspicion, once it has taken root, particularly in a man who has already been deceived once before by someone he trusted completely. Clara's blood ran cold at the implication. "You believe he doubts me now?" Lady Constance's expression softened slightly, though her words remained blunt. "I believe my nephew is frightened, Miss Bennet, more than he would ever admit aloud. He has allowed himself, cautiously, to care for you, and now finds himself facing circumstances that echo, however faintly, the betrayal that nearly destroyed him once already. Fear makes even reasonable men behave unreasonably." That evening, Clara sought out the Duke directly, arriving at Renfield with a determination to face whatever doubt had begun growing between them, rather than allow rumors to fester unanswered. She found him in his study, standing near the window, his posture rigid, in a way that immediately confirmed Lady Constance's warning. "You have heard the rumors," Clara said quietly. "I have," he confirmed, though he did not turn to face her immediately. "They are lies, Alaric. I never encouraged Lord Percy's attention, nor did I orchestrate any of this to pressure you into settling my father's debt. I know that, logically," he said, finally turning toward her. His gray eyes shadowed with a conflict she had not seen since their very first conversation. "But I have believed something similar before, Clara. I believed Vivian loved me entirely, right until the moment I learned otherwise. Forgive me, if old wounds make new trust more difficult to hold steady, even when I know, in my heart, that you are nothing like her." "I understand your fear," Clara said, stepping closer despite the tension radiating from him. "But I cannot control what others choose to believe about circumstances neither of us created. I can only tell you the truth, again and again if necessary, until you choose to trust it." "And if I cannot," he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "if the fear proves stronger than my willingness to trust, despite everything I feel for you?" Clara felt tears threaten at his words, though she refused to let them fall. "Then I suppose we will both have lost something neither of us can afford to lose." The Duke closed his eyes briefly, as though wrestling with something deep and painful beneath his careful composure. When he opened them again, something had shifted, though Clara could not yet tell in which direction. "I need time," he said finally. "Not because I doubt your character, Clara, but because I fear my own judgment, given how badly it failed me once before." The words struck harder than any accusation could have, precisely because they carried no anger, only quiet, aching uncertainty. Clara nodded slowly, understanding, even as her heart broke slightly at the distance suddenly opening between them. "Take whatever time you need," she said softly, "but know that I will still be here, telling the same truth, whenever you are ready to hear it fully again." She left Renfield that evening, with a heaviness she had not felt since the earliest days of Margaret Hale's mockery, understanding now that the greatest threat to their happiness had never truly been rumors or rivals at all, but the deep, lingering wound of a betrayal neither of them had caused, yet both of them now had to find a way to overcome. 3 days passed without word from Renfield, and each one felt heavier than the last. Clara busied herself with small tasks around the house, helping her father manage the accounts now free of their earlier burden, sitting with Alice by the fire in the evenings, though her thoughts remained fixed on the Duke's troubled expression the last time she had seen him. She understood his fear, understood the shadow Vivian Ashworth's betrayal still cast across his ability to trust, yet understanding did little to ease the ache of uncertainty that had settled over her own heart. On the 4th day, Lady Constance arrived once more, though this time her expression carried something closer to urgency than her usual composed severity. "Lord Percy Hollis has requested a private audience with my nephew," she said, seating herself without waiting for invitation. "I do not know the content of their planned discussion, but given recent events, I suspect it involves you, Miss Bennet, and I fear whatever he intends will only deepen my nephew's doubts rather than resolve them." Clara felt fresh alarm rise within her. "When does this meeting take place?" "This very afternoon," Lady Constance said. "I came directly here upon learning of it, uncertain whether you would wish to know, though I suspected you would rather face this development than remain ignorant of it." Clara did not hesitate. Within the hour, she had arranged transportation to Renfield, arriving just as Lord Percy's grand carriage pulled away from the estate's entrance. his expression carrying a satisfaction that immediately filled Clara with dread. She found the Duke in his study once more, though his posture now carried a rigidity far more severe than during their previous conversation. "What did he tell you?" Clara asked without preamble. The Duke turned toward her slowly, his gray eyes unreadable, in a way that frightened her more than open anger might have. "He showed me a letter, supposedly written in your hand, arranging a private meeting with him, weeks before your father's death became public knowledge. A letter suggesting you sought his attention deliberately, long before circumstances forced the issue into the open." "I wrote no such letter," Clara said immediately, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. "I want to believe that," the Duke said, his voice strained. "But the handwriting appeared remarkably similar to your own, Clara, and I confess, I no longer know how to separate genuine doubt from old fear." Clara felt something break slightly within her, not from anger at his suspicion, but from the crushing realization of exactly how thoroughly Lord Percy had constructed his deception. "Show me this letter," she said, "please." The Duke retrieved it from his desk, and Clara examined the forged handwriting carefully, noting small inconsistencies that someone unfamiliar with her true penmanship might easily overlook, but that she recognized immediately as clumsy imitation, rather than her own hand. "Look here," she said, pointing to a particular flourish in the letter's signature. "I have never signed my name with this curve beneath the final letter, and here, this phrase, I would never write in such a manner. This letter is a forgery, Alaric, created deliberately to destroy whatever trust remained between us." The Duke studied the letter again, more carefully this time, and Clara watched something shift slowly across his features as doubt began, cautiously, to give way toward reconsideration. "If this is forged, then Percy has gone to considerable lengths to ensure my doubt. He proposed marriage, to secure your fortune's rival, and I refused him," Clara said. "A man capable of such calculated exploitation of my family's misfortune is more than capable of forging a letter to protect his wounded pride." Before the Duke could respond, a commotion arose near the study's entrance, and moments later, a household servant appeared, breathless, holding a separate letter of his own. "Your Grace, this arrived only moments ago, delivered by a stable boy from the Hollis estate. He said his conscience would not allow him to remain silent." The Duke opened the letter quickly, his expression shifting rapidly as he read its contents. When he finally looked up, something like shame had settled across his features. "It is a confession," he said quietly, "from a servant in Percy's employ, detailing how his master ordered the forged letter created specifically to discredit you, following his rejected proposal. He states clearly that Percy intended to use it precisely as he did today, to sabotage our relationship out of wounded pride." Clara felt relief flood through her, though it was quickly followed by a quieter, more painful realization. "You doubted me anyway, Alaric, even before this confession arrived." "I did," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret, "and I am deeply sorry for it. My fear clouded judgment. I should have trusted completely, given everything you have shown me these past weeks. I allowed old wounds to speak louder than the truth standing directly before me." Clara studied him for a long moment, understanding the depth of his apology, yet also recognizing the fragile uncertainty still lingering beneath it. "I understand your fear, Alaric. I do not blame you for feeling it. But I need to know that when doubt arises again, and it will arise again, you will choose to trust what you know of my character, over what old wounds whisper in your ear." "I will," he said, closing the distance between them, his gray eyes steady with a sincerity that finally began to ease the ache in her chest. "I promise you, Clara, I will." Though the immediate danger of Lord Percy's scheme had passed, Clara understood that trust, once shaken, required more than a single apology to fully repair. The road ahead remained uncertain, though for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope it might still lead somewhere worth reaching. Lord Percy Hollis left the county within the month, his forged letter and the servant's confession, having spread through local society, with the same speed his own lies once traveled. No one greeted him warmly again, and Clara felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only quiet relief that the danger he represented had finally passed. Margaret Hale, too, found her earlier cruelty returning to haunt her, as guests who once laughed at her jokes now regarded her with the same wariness once reserved for Clara alone. She did not apologize, not directly, though her attempts at further mockery grew noticeably quieter in the weeks that followed. For Clara and the Duke, the weeks after Lord Percy's exposed deception passed more gently than either had expected. The Duke visited often, no longer guarding his expressions so carefully in her presence, allowing warmth and genuine laughter to surface more readily than she had ever witnessed during their earliest conversations. Lady Constance, too, softened considerably, her sharp warnings gradually replaced by something closer to genuine affection, though she remained, as always, blunt in her observations. "You have changed him," she told Clara one afternoon, watching her nephew laugh freely at something Alice had said during a shared visit to Renfield. "I have not seen him smile so easily since before Vivian's betrayal. Whatever fear remains in him, Miss Bennet, I believe you are slowly teaching him to set it aside." The county's annual harvest ball arrived soon after, the very same gathering where, months earlier, Clara had first been dared to sit beside a man everyone believed incapable of warmth. This time, she attended not out of stubborn pride, but on the Duke's own arm, the whispers surrounding them now carrying admiration rather than mockery. As the evening progressed, the Duke led her away from the crowded dance floor, toward a quiet balcony, overlooking the moonlit gardens, his expression carrying a nervous energy she had not seen from him before. "Clara," he said, taking her hands gently in his own, "when you first sat beside me at this very gathering, I believed myself entirely closed to the possibility of trusting anyone again. You proved that belief wrong, patiently, honestly, even when circumstances gave you every reason to walk away instead." "I never wanted to walk away," Clara said softly. "I know that now," he said, his gray eyes steady with a certainty she had never seen so clearly before. "You have shown me, again and again, that trust rebuilt slowly can grow stronger than trust that was never broken at all. I do not wish to spend another day without you fully beside me, Clara Bennet, not merely as someone I care for deeply, but as someone I hope to call my wife." He knelt then, producing a small velvet box from his coat, and Clara felt tears gather in her eyes as he opened it to reveal a ring, far simpler than she might have expected from a man of his wealth, elegant rather than extravagant, precisely suited to the honest connection they had built together. "Marry me," he said quietly, "not because society expects it, nor because rumors demand resolution, but because I love you, entirely and without reservation, and I cannot imagine building the remainder of my life without you beside me." Clara looked down at him, her heart full to overflowing, remembering every step that had led them to this moment. The dare, the dinner, the whispered rumors, the forged letters, the careful rebuilding of trust between two people who had both learned, in their own ways, the painful cost of betrayal.
"Yes," she said, her voice breaking slightly with joy.
"Yes, Alaric, I will marry you." He rose and kissed her gently beneath the moonlight, and when they finally returned to the ballroom together, the assembled guests broke into spontaneous applause. Even those who had once doubted or mocked her, now swept up in the genuine happiness radiating from the couple before them. Margaret Hale watched from the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable, though even she could not deny the transformation that had occurred. Not merely in the Duke's demeanor, but in the quiet dignity Clara had maintained throughout every trial designed to break her. Months later, their wedding filled the same grand hall where Clara had first accepted a cruel dare out of nothing more than wounded pride. As she walked toward Alaric, dressed simply yet beautifully, she caught his eye across the gathered crowd and saw, reflected there, none of the cold distance rumors once described, only warmth, only certainty, only a love that had been tested thoroughly and had emerged, against every expectation, stronger for having survived it. The county that once whispered about the feared Duke now spoke of him differently, as a man capable of deep loyalty and quiet tenderness, transformed not by magic or coincidence, but by the patient honesty of a woman who had never expected, when she first sat down beside him, that a single dare might lead her toward the truest happiness she had ever known. And as Duke Alaric Sinclair looked at his new wife standing beside him, he understood, more clearly than ever before, that the fear which had once ruled his heart had finally, completely, been replaced by something far stronger and far more enduring, a love built not on convenience or circumstance, but on trust, rebuilt, slowly, honestly, and completely, one truthful conversation at a time.